Subscribe now. New Royal Guard stories, exposing shocking moments inside the royal family. The morning of March 15th started like any other Tuesday at Kensington Palace. Sergeant James Whitmore had been assigned to the family wing, a duty he'd performed hundreds of times during his 12 years of service to the royal family. The corridors were quiet, almost peaceful. As early morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. James had always prided himself on being observant. It was part of his training, but more than that, it was instinct. He noticed things others missed: a door left slightly ajar when it should be closed, footsteps that didn't match the usual patterns, voices where there should be silence. This morning, something felt different. He was stationed near the main staircase when he heard it. The distinct sound of metal against metal, faint but unmistakable. It was coming from the second floor, from the direction of the children's wing. James checked his watch. It was barely 7 in the morning. The Prince and Princess of Wales had left earlier for an engagement in Scotland. They wouldn't be back until evening. The children were still asleep, or at least they should be. The sound came again, more deliberate this time. James moved quietly toward the source, his years of training guiding each careful step. As he approached the nursery corridor, he could see a figure standing outside Prince Louis's playroom. The person was bent over the door handle, working at something with focused concentration. It took James a moment to process what he was seeing. The Queen Consort Camilla was crouched in front of the playroom door with what appeared to be a screwdriver in one hand and a small bag at her feet. She was still in her dressing gown, her hair not yet styled for the day, and she kept glancing nervously down the corridor as she worked. James froze. Protocol in situations like this was clear: never interrupt a member of the royal family unless there was immediate danger. But this wasn't a normal situation. What was the Queen Consort doing at Prince Louis's door at this hour? And why did she look so anxious? He watched as Camilla removed the existing lock mechanism from the door, placing the pieces carefully into her bag. From that same bag, she retrieved a new lock, this one notably different from the original. It was larger, more complex, with what looked like a digital keypad attached. James's mind raced. He'd served in enough royal residences to know that changing locks wasn't a casual matter. Every lock in the palace was catalogued, every key accounted for. Changes required paperwork, approval from security, coordination with the household staff. This was being done in secret, in the early hours when no one should be watching. Camilla worked quickly, her fingers fumbling slightly with the unfamiliar mechanism. She muttered something under her breath, a curse perhaps, as one of the screws fell to the floor. She scrambled to pick it up, her eyes darting around nervously. James stepped back into the shadow of a nearby alcove, his heart pounding. He needed to think clearly. If he revealed himself now, what would he say? How would he explain watching a senior member of the royal family without announcing his presence? But if he did nothing, if he walked away and pretended he hadn't seen this, what might the consequences be? The Queen Consort finally got the new lock in place. She tested it several times, entering a code on the keypad that James couldn't see from his position. The lock clicked open, then closed again. She nodded to herself, satisfied, then gathered her tools and the old lock parts into her bag. Just as she was about to stand, a small voice echoed from down the hallway. "Gangin, is that you?" James's breath caught. It was Princess Charlotte, appearing at the end of the corridor in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She was 7 years old, bright and curious, and she'd clearly heard the noise. Camilla's face went pale. She stood quickly, positioning herself in front of the door as if to hide what she'd been doing. "Oh, darling. Yes, it's me." "What are you doing up so early?" Charlotte walked closer, her small feet patting softly on the carpet. "I heard noises." "What are you doing at Louis's playroom?" The Queen Consort's smile seemed forced even from James's distant vantage point. "Oh, just checking on something, sweetheart. The door wasn't closing properly. I wanted to make sure it was fixed before your brother woke up." Charlotte tilted her head, that characteristic gesture that reminded everyone of her grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth. "But why are you fixing it? Doesn't Mr. Henderson do that?" Mr. Henderson was the palace maintenance supervisor, a man who'd been with the household for over 30 years. Charlotte was right to be confused. This wasn't normal. Camilla laughed, but it sounded hollow. Well, I noticed it late last night and thought I'd just take care of it myself. You know how I like to keep busy? Charlotte didn't look convinced, but she was polite, as she'd been trained to be. Oh, okay. Can I see Louis? I want to show him the drawing I made yesterday. Not right now, darling. He's still sleeping, and we shouldn't wake him. Why don't you go back to bed for a little while? It's still very early. The princess hesitated, looking at the door, then at her step-grandmother. Something in her expression suggested she knew something wasn't quite right, but she was too young to articulate what it was. Finally, she nodded. Okay, Gangan. But can you read to me later? Of course, sweetheart. Now run along. Charlotte disappeared back down the corridor, and Camilla waited until the sound of the child's footsteps faded completely. Then she let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging with relief. She picked up her bag, took one more look at the newly installed lock, and hurried away in the opposite direction. James remained in the shadows for several minutes after she'd gone, trying to process what he'd witnessed. He looked at his watch again. It was now 7:20. In about 40 minutes, the household staff would begin their morning routines. The nannies would wake the children. Breakfast would be prepared. The palace would come to life. He walked slowly to Prince Louis's playroom door and examined the new lock. It was professional grade, the kind used in secure facilities. The digital keypad glowed faintly in the dim corridor light. He tried the handle. Locked. He tried again, hoping perhaps it had been left open. It hadn't. This wasn't just unusual. This was unprecedented. And James knew with a sinking feeling in his stomach that he was going to have to report it. But to whom? The Prince and Princess of Wales were in Scotland. The King was at Sandringham. Going above the Queen Consort's head could end his career. But staying silent about a potential security breach could have consequences he couldn't even imagine. He returned to his post, his mind spinning with questions. Why would the Queen Consort change the locks on a 5-year-old's playroom? What was she trying to keep out? Or more disturbingly, what was she trying to keep in? And why do it in secret without informing anyone? As the palace began to wake around him, James made his decision. He would document everything he'd seen, note the exact time and circumstances, and he would report it through the proper channels. Whatever was happening, whatever Camilla's intentions might be, this was something that needed to be investigated. He didn't know it yet, but this morning's discovery was about to pull back the curtain on tensions within the royal family that had been simmering for months, tensions that centered on the youngest Wales child and what role he would play in the future of the monarchy. The nursery trap had been set. Now the real question was, who was it meant to catch? By 9 o'clock, the palace was in full swing. Maria Santos, Prince Louis's primary nanny, arrived for her shift with her usual cheerful energy. She'd been with the Wales family since Louis was born, and she knew the little prince's routines better than anyone. Tuesday mornings were special because Louis had his music lesson at 10, and he always insisted on practicing his drums in the playroom beforehand. Maria walked down the corridor, mentally running through the day's schedule. She reached the playroom door and pulled out her key, the same one she'd used every day for the past 3 years. She inserted it into the lock and turned. Nothing happened. She frowned, withdrew the key, and examined it. It was definitely the right one, with its distinctive blue tag. She tried again, jiggling it slightly the way she sometimes had to do with the temperamental old lock. Still nothing. That's when she noticed the lock itself had changed. The brass fixture she was used to seeing had been replaced with a sleek, modern mechanism with a digital keypad. Maria stepped back, confused. Nobody had mentioned anything about changing the locks. There were no work orders posted, no maintenance notices. She tried the handle directly. Locked tight. That's odd, she muttered to herself. She pulled out her phone and called down to the household office. Mrs. Patricia Drummond answered on the second ring. Good morning, Maria. What can I do for you? Morning, Mrs. Drummond. I'm at Prince Louis's playroom, and there's a new lock on the door. My key doesn't work. Do you know anything about this? There was a pause. A new lock? No, there's nothing in the maintenance log about any work being done in the children's wing. Are you certain? I'm looking right at it. It's completely different from what was here yesterday. It's got a digital keypad and everything. Another pause. Longer this time, Mrs. Drummond had been managing the household for over 20 years, and she prided herself on knowing everything that happened within the palace walls. The concern in her voice was clear when she spoke again. I'll look into this immediately. In the meantime, I'll send someone up with the master key. Thank you, Mrs. Drummond. Maria hung up and looked at the door with growing unease. In all her years working for the royal family, nothing like this had ever happened. Locks didn't just change themselves overnight. 10 minutes later, Mr. Henderson arrived, his toolbox in hand, and Mrs. Drummond right behind him. The maintenance supervisor's face was already red with frustration. This is absolutely irregular, he was saying. Nobody changes locks in this palace without going through me. Nobody. It's a security protocol. Examine the new lock closely, his frown deepening. This is a high-security biometric lock. Very expensive. Very sophisticated. And it's been installed professionally. He tried his master key. It didn't work. He tried his override key, the one that was supposed to open every door in the palace in case of emergency. Nothing. Can you remove it? Mrs. Drummond asked. I can, but it'll take time. These things are designed to be tamper-proof. I'll need to drill through the mechanism. He looked at both women. This is going to make noise and might damage the door frame. Shouldn't we wait for approval from their royal highnesses? Mrs. Drummond shook her head firmly. The prince and princess are in Scotland for the day. We can't leave the playroom locked. Prince Louis will be looking for his toys within the hour. As if on cue, they heard the patter of small feet. Prince Louis himself came running down the corridor, his face lit up with his characteristic mischievous grin. At 5 years old, he was full of energy and always getting into something. Maria, can we play drums now? I want to practice before my lesson. Maria crouched down to his level, her smile warm despite her concern. Good morning, Your Highness. We have a tiny problem with the playroom door. Mr. Henderson is going to fix it, all right? Louis looked at the door, then at the adults gathered around it, then back at Maria. His lower lip started to tremble. But I want my drums. I know, sweetheart. We'll get them, I promise. Why don't we have breakfast first? And by the time you're done, Mr. Henderson will have the door open. Louis considered this, his face serious in the way only a 5-year-old's can be. With chocolate pancakes? I'll see what we can arrange. The little prince nodded and took Maria's hand, allowing himself to be led toward the dining room. Once he was gone, Mr. Henderson set to work. The drilling was loud and echoed through the corridor. Several staff members poked their heads out to see what was happening, curiosity written on their faces. Within 20 minutes, news had spread through the palace that something unusual was happening in the children's wing. James Whitmore heard about it while on his break. His stomach tightened. He'd filed his report with his commanding officer, Captain Morrison, less than an hour ago. Morrison had listened to James's account with an increasingly grave expression, taking detailed notes. When James finished, Morrison had said only, "Stay close. Don't discuss this with anyone." Now, hearing that the nanny couldn't access the playroom, James knew his report was going to create ripples. Big ones. It took Mr. Henderson 45 minutes to break through the lock. When the door finally swung open, Maria quickly stepped inside to inventory the room, making sure nothing had been disturbed. Everything appeared normal. The drum set in the corner, the tower of blocks, the shelf of picture books, the art supplies neatly organized in their bins. But Mrs. Drummond had noticed something. On the small table near the window, there was an envelope. A cream-colored envelope with the royal crest, positioned prominently where it couldn't be missed. She walked over and picked it up. There was no name on it, just the crest. She opened it carefully and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Her face went white as she read. "What is it?" Mr. Henderson asked. Mrs. Drummond's hand trembled slightly. "It's a memo. From the Queen Consort. It says that by order of Her Majesty, this playroom is to be converted into a storage room for historical artifacts from Clarence House. It says the Prince and Princess of Wales have been informed and have agreed to the change. Maria gasped. But that's not true. The princess was just talking yesterday about ordering new art supplies for this room. She never mentioned anything about closing it down. This memo is dated today, Mrs. Drummond continued, her voice tight, but it references meetings and approvals that supposedly happened last week, none of which I have any record of. Mr. Henderson set down his drill. Are you saying the Queen Consort put this here? That she's the one who changed the lock? I'm not saying anything, Mrs. Drummond replied carefully, though her expression said volumes. But I am going to call the princess in Scotland immediately. This needs to be addressed. She pulled out her phone and stepped into the corridor. Maria could hear her speaking in low, urgent tones. When she returned, her face was set in grim lines. The princess knows nothing about this. She's furious. She's cutting her engagements short and returning to London this afternoon. Mrs. Drummond looked at Mr. Henderson. Install a new lock, the old kind, and make sure every authorized person has a key. I'll handle the paperwork. What about this lock? Henderson gestured to the broken mechanism on the floor. Bag it, label it, and lock it in the security office. Something tells me we're going to need evidence. As the morning progressed, tension built throughout the palace. Staff members whispered in corners. Security personnel exchanged meaningful glances. And through it all, Prince Louis played with his drums, blissfully unaware that his playroom had become the center of a royal storm. In Scotland, Catherine, Princess of Wales, sat in her car as it raced toward the airport. Her jaw was clenched, her phone gripped tightly in her hand. Beside her, Prince William stared out the window, his own anger barely contained. How dare she, Catherine said quietly. How dare she touch anything in our children's spaces? William reached over and took her hand. We'll handle this together. Neither of them knew yet about James's report, about what the guard had witnessed in the early morning hours. They didn't know about the careful planning that had gone into changing that lock, or about the memo that had been prepared in advance. But they were about to find out, and when they did, the confrontation that followed would reveal fault lines in the royal family that went far deeper than a simple lock on a playroom door. The Prince and Princess of Wales arrived back at Kensington Palace at 3:30 that afternoon. Their car barely stopped before Catherine was out and striding toward the entrance, her face a mask of controlled fury. William followed, his expression equally dark. Staff members who saw them coming quickly found reasons to be elsewhere. Mrs. Drummond met them in the private sitting room, a folder of documents in her arms. Behind her stood Captain Morrison, James's commanding officer, looking decidedly uncomfortable. Tell me everything, Catherine said, without preamble. Not even removing her coat, Mrs. Drummond laid out the timeline, the nanny's discovery at 9. The new lock, the memo, the broken lock now secured in the security office. She handed Catherine the cream-colored envelope with the royal crest. Catherine read the memo once. Then again, her face growing paler with each word. This is completely fabricated. William and I never had any such conversation with anyone about closing Louis's playroom. Never. We suspected as much, Your Royal Highness, Mrs. Drummond said carefully, which is why Captain Morrison is here. The security captain stepped forward. Your Royal Highnesses, one of my men filed a report this morning that I believe is relevant to this situation. I wanted to brief you personally. Go on, William said, his voice dangerously quiet. Morrison pulled out his notes. At approximately 7:05 this morning, Sergeant James Whitmore was on duty in the family wing. He observed the Queen Consort outside Prince Louis's playroom. She was alone and appeared to be changing the lock on the door herself. The room went completely silent. Catherine slowly sat down as if her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Morrison continued. Sergeant Whitmore observed the entire operation, which took approximately 15 minutes. The Queen Consort installed what appears to be the same high-security lock that the nanny discovered this morning. She then tested it with a code that Sergeant Whitmore was unable to see from his position. Did she see him? Did he speak to her? William asked. No, sir. He remained concealed, observing as part of his security duties. However, Princess Charlotte did appear briefly during the incident. She asked the Queen Consort what she was doing. According to Sergeant Whitmore's report, the Queen Consort told the princess that she was fixing a door that wasn't closing properly. Catherine's hands were shaking now. She lied to our daughter. She lied to Charlotte. There's more, Morrison said reluctantly. After installing the lock, the Queen Consort appeared to place something inside the playroom. This would align with Mrs. Drummond's discovery of the memo. William stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to the room. When he spoke, his voice was tight with barely controlled rage. She went into our children's private space. She changed the locks without permission, without consultation, without any authority to do so. She created false documentation. And she lied to our 7-year-old daughter when she was caught. The question is why, Catherine said softly. Why go to such elaborate lengths over a playroom? Mrs. Drummond cleared her throat delicately. If I may, Your Royal Highness, I don't believe this was actually about the playroom itself. Everyone turned to look at her. I've been in royal service for over 20 years, the older woman continued. And I've seen many power struggles, many territorial disputes. They're almost never about what they appear to be about on the surface. What are you suggesting? Catherine asked. I'm suggesting that this was a test. A way to see if the Queen Consort could exert authority in your household, over your children's spaces, without your knowledge or consent. If this had succeeded, if you hadn't returned early, if the nanny had simply accepted the new lock in the memo without question, it would have established a precedent. William turned from the window. A precedent for what? For the Queen Consort to have access and control over aspects of your children's lives? Today, it's a playroom. Tomorrow it might be their schedules, their education, their public appearances. The playroom was just the opening move. Catherine stood up, her decision made. We need to speak with the king, immediately. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Your Royal Highnesses, there's a complication there. The Queen Consort left for Sandringham this morning, shortly after the incident. She's with His Majesty now. Of course she was, Catherine thought bitterly. Camilla had gone straight to Charles, no doubt to present her own version of events before anyone else could reach him. Then we'll go to Sandringham, William said firmly. Tonight? This cannot wait. Over the next hour, calls were made, arrangements were set. The children would stay at Kensington with their nanny and additional security. The prince and princess would drive to Norfolk and confront both the king and queen consort directly. Before they left, Catherine asked to see Sergeant Whitmore. The guard was brought to the sitting room, standing at attention. Clearly nervous about being in the presence of the future king and queen. At ease, Sergeant, William said. We want to thank you for your diligence and for filing your report. What you witnessed this morning has helped us understand a very serious situation. Just doing my duty, sir? Catherine studied him carefully. You could have walked away, pretended you didn't see anything. It would have been easier than filing a report about a senior member of the family. Yes, ma'am. But it wouldn't have been right. My job is to protect this family, all of you. That includes protecting the integrity of your household. William extended his hand, and James shook it. You've done exactly that. Thank you, Sergeant. Your integrity is noted and appreciated. After James left, Catherine turned to her husband. We need to be very careful about how we handle this. If we come in too aggressive, Charles will get defensive about Camilla. You know how he is. Also know how he is about the children, William countered. He adores Louis. When he hears that Camilla was changing locks on his grandson's playroom at dawn, creating false documents, lying to Charlotte, he's not going to be pleased unless she's already spun this somehow. Made herself the victim or the misunderstood helper.
Ow.
William pulled on his coat. Then we'll just have to unspin it. The drive to Sandringham took nearly 3 hours. They rode in silence for much of it, each lost in their own thoughts. Catherine kept thinking about Charlotte's innocent question to her step-grandmother, about Louis asking for his drums, about how this violation of their home had put their children in the middle of adult power games. They arrived at Sandringham just after 7 in the evening. The king's private secretary met them at the door, his face carefully neutral. Their Majesties are in the drawing room. They're expecting you." As William and Catherine walked through the familiar corridors of the Norfolk estate, Catherine felt her resolve harden. This wasn't just about a lock or a playroom. This was about boundaries, about respect, about who had the right to make decisions regarding their children. They entered the drawing room to find Charles and Camilla seated by the fireplace. The king rose when they entered, his expression concerned. Camilla remained seated, her face composed but her eyes wary. "William, Catherine, this is unexpected. Is everything all right with the children?" "The children are fine, Father," William said carefully. "But something happened today at Kensington that we need to discuss with you both." Camilla set down her teacup. "If this is about the playroom, I was trying to help. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." Catherine felt William tense beside her, and she placed a gentle hand on his arm. She spoke calmly, clearly. "There was no misunderstanding, Camilla. There was an unauthorized entry into our private residence, an installation of a security lock without our knowledge or consent, the creation of false documentation claiming our approval, and a lie told to our daughter when she questioned what was happening." The king looked between his wife and his son and daughter-in-law. "I think someone needs to explain exactly what occurred." William pulled out his phone and brought up the photos Mrs. Drummond had sent, pictures of the broken lock, of the memo, of the new mechanism. He also had Morrison's report, which he'd read multiple times on the drive. "At 7:05 this morning, one of our guards witnessed your wife changing the lock on Lewis's playroom door. She installed a high-security lock, placed a memo inside claiming we'd approved converting the room to storage, and when Charlotte asked her what she was doing, she lied and said she was fixing a broken door." Charles looked at Camilla, his face confused. "Is this true?" Camilla's composure finally cracked. "I was trying to help preserve some important family items. The playroom seemed like a good temporary space, and I thought perhaps William and Catherine had too much on their minds to deal with such details. I was going to explain everything later, by changing our locks at dawn." Catherine's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "By creating false documents? By doing all of this while we were away?" "I didn't think you'd mind," Camilla said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You didn't think," William said quietly, "or you didn't want us to know until it was already done." The king held up his hand. "Everyone, please. Let's discuss this rationally." But Catherine had had enough. "Charles, this isn't about rationality. This is about boundaries. We have been more than accommodating, more than welcoming to Camilla. But our children's spaces are not negotiable. Our home is not somewhere she can simply walk into and make changes as she sees fit." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire. Then Charles sighed deeply and looked at his wife with unmistakable disappointment. "Camilla, did you really think this was appropriate?" And in that moment, in the way Camilla's face fell, Catherine knew they'd won this battle. But she also knew, with absolute certainty, that the war was far from over. The silence in the Sandringham drawing room stretched uncomfortably. Camilla looked at her husband, her mouth opening and closing as if trying to find words that wouldn't come. Charles remained standing by his chair, his face showing an emotion his son and daughter-in-law rarely saw from him: genuine anger. "I asked you a question." "Camilla," the king said, his voice measured but firm, "did you truly believe it was appropriate to change locks on my grandson's playroom without consulting his parents?" Camilla's composure finally shattered. "I was thinking about the family legacy, Charles. Those artifacts from Clarence's house are important historical pieces. They need proper storage, and I thought—" "You thought you could make decisions about our children's living spaces?" William interrupted, his patience exhausted. "You thought you could bypass us entirely?" "That's not fair," Camilla protested, standing now. "I've always tried to be supportive of you both, to help where I could. If I overstepped, it was with good intentions." Catherine spoke quietly, but every word carried weight. "Good intentions don't install high-security locks at dawn. Good intentions don't create false documents claiming approvals that were never given. And good intentions certainly don't lie to a 7-year-old child." Charles turned to his wife. "You told Charlotte you were fixing a broken door?" "She startled me. I didn't want to worry her, so you lied to her instead," William said flatly. The king walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames. When he turned back, his face was drawn. "I think what concerns me most is not just what happened, but the planning that went into it. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. You had to purchase that lock, arrange to have it delivered, wait until William and Catherine were away. This was premeditated." Camilla sat back down heavily. "You make it sound so sinister. I was just trying to solve a practical problem by creating a much bigger one," Charles replied. He looked at his son and daughter-in-law. "What would you like me to do?" It was the question Catherine had been waiting for, and she'd spent the entire drive preparing her answer. "We need clear boundaries established in writing. No member of the family, regardless of rank, has authority to make changes to our private residence without our explicit documented approval. No changes to locks, no rearranging of rooms, no decisions affecting our children's spaces or schedules." "That seems extreme," Camilla interjected. "What's extreme," William countered, "is needing to have this conversation in the first place. What's extreme is finding out from our household staff that someone changed the locks while we were away." Charles nodded slowly. "Your requests are reasonable. I'll have the private secretary draw up a formal protocol. It will apply to all family members and all residences, including you." Catherine asked directly. The king met her eyes. "Including me." "You're right. Your home is your home. It should never have been in question." Camilla stood abruptly. "So I'm to be treated like some sort of criminal now? Have my access to my step-grandchildren restricted because of one misunderstanding?" "No one said anything about restricting access," Catherine replied calmly. "We're simply establishing that our home requires our permission before changes are made. That's not punishment, Camilla. It's basic respect." But Camilla was on a roll now, her voice rising. "This is what it's always been about, isn't it? You've never truly accepted me. Never trusted me with the children. I've tried for years to build a relationship with them, and at every turn, you've held me at arm's length." William's jaw tightened. "Our children adore you. They call you Gangan. They run to you when you visit. What they don't understand, what we've shielded them from, is this constant pushing of boundaries, this testing to see what you can get away with." "That is not what this was," Camilla insisted, but her voice wavered. "Then what was it?" Catherine asked simply. "Explain to us why you needed to change that lock so badly that you couldn't wait to ask us first. Explain why you created a memo claiming we'd approved something we knew nothing about. Help us understand." Camilla looked at Charles, but for once her husband wasn't jumping to her defense. She was on her own. "I wanted to feel useful," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone has their role, their purpose. You two are the future. You're everything people care about. The children are adored wherever they go. And I'm just the woman who married into the family. It's the one people still whisper about." For the first time that evening, Catherine felt a flicker of sympathy. She understood, perhaps better than Camilla knew, what it was like to be the outsider. Who married in? To always wonder if you truly belonged. But sympathy didn't excuse what had happened. "Camilla," Catherine said more gently, "if you wanted to help with historical artifacts, you could have asked us. If you wanted to be more involved, you could have spoken to us. We've never shut you out deliberately. But what you did today wasn't about helping. Whether you realize it or not, it was about control." The queen consort's eyes filled with tears. "I never meant for it to become this." "But it did," William said firmly. "And now we have to fix it." Charles finally moved from the fireplace, sitting down in his chair. "Here's what's going to happen. Camilla, you will write a formal apology to William and Catherine. You will also apologize to Charlotte for misleading her. The artifacts you wanted to store will be properly cataloged and placed in an appropriate location at Clarence House or St. James's Palace. And you will undergo the same security briefings that every family member receives about protocol and boundaries." "Charles, that's humiliating," Camilla protested. "What's humiliating?" the king replied with unexpected sharpness. "Is having my son and daughter-in-law drive 3 hours to confront us about something that should never have happened? What's humiliating is knowing that my household staff is gossiping about my wife changing locks in the middle of the night. You created this situation, Camilla. Now we all have to clean it up." The tears that had been threatening finally spilled down Camilla's cheeks. She wiped them away angrily. "I'll write the apology." But I want it noted that I never intended harm. I was trying to help. Intentions matter less than actions, Catherine said quietly. And your actions today crossed lines that can't be uncrossed. The meeting wound down shortly after that. Arrangements were made for the formal protocols to be drafted. Charles apologized privately to his son and daughter-in-law for his wife's actions, and Camilla retreated to her private chambers, the weight of her miscalculation finally settling on her shoulders. During the drive back to Kensington Palace, William reached over and took Catherine's hand. "You handled that perfectly." "I wanted to scream at her," Catherine admitted. "I wanted to ask her what gave her the right. Who did she think she was?" But that would have made Charles defensive. Instead, you were calm and clear and absolutely right. Father couldn't argue with a single point you made. Catherine looked out at the dark countryside passing by. "This won't be the end of it, you know. She'll find other ways to push, other boundaries to test." "I know, but at least now we have protocols in place. More importantly, Father saw her for what she did. That matters." Back at Kensington Palace, they looked in on their sleeping children before going to bed. Louis was curled up with his favorite stuffed lion, his face peaceful in sleep. Charlotte had kicked off her covers, and Catherine gently pulled them back over her daughter. In his crib, even though he was getting too big for it, little Prince George slept soundly, completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded over his younger brother's playroom. Catherine stood in the doorway watching them, William's arm around her shoulders. "They deserve better than this," she whispered. "They have better than this," William replied. "They have us, and we'll always protect them." The next morning, the household staff noticed that Prince Louis's playroom had a brand new lock simple. It's a traditional one, with keys distributed only to authorized personnel. Mrs. Drummond personally oversaw the installation, and Mr. Henderson made absolutely certain it was documented in every possible log and record. Sergeant James Whitmore returned to his regular duties, though he found himself with a commendation. In his file and a quiet reputation as someone who put duty above convenience, Captain Morrison made sure the other guards knew what had happened, not as gossip but as a lesson in the importance of reporting irregularities. Regardless of who was involved, 3 days later a handwritten letter arrived at Kensington Palace. It was from the Queen Consort, addressed to the Prince and Princess of Wales. The apology was brief and formal, acknowledging that she had acted without proper consultation and regretted any distress caused. There was a separate, shorter note for Charlotte, apologizing for not being completely honest when the princess had asked what she was doing. Catherine read both letters, then filed them away. They were words on paper, necessary, but not particularly meaningful. What mattered more was what came next. For the following weeks, the new protocols were implemented across all royal residences. Every family member received a briefing on boundaries and proper procedures. It was tedious and somewhat awkward, but it was necessary, and slowly, carefully, life returned to normal. Louis played his drums in his playroom, Charlotte practiced her piano, and the rhythms of royal life continued. But everyone involved knew something had shifted. A line had been drawn, a boundary established. The Queen Consort had tested how far she could reach into the Wales household. She had been firmly, definitively stopped. In the grand scheme of royal history, it was a small incident to change lock, a false memo, a confrontation at Sandringham. But in the quiet power dynamics of the family, it was a turning point. Catherine had proven she would protect her family and her home with calm, devastating effectiveness. William had shown he would stand firm against anyone, including his own family, when his children were involved. And Charles had demonstrated that his loyalty to the institution and to his son's family would outweigh his natural instinct to defend his wife. As for Camilla, she learned a hard lesson about the difference between being Queen Consort and being in control. The title gave her rank and respect, but it didn't give her authority over other people's homes or children. The nursery trap had been sprung, but not in the way its setter had intended. Instead of establishing Camilla's authority, it had established everyone else's limits on it. Instead of gaining control, she had lost what informal access she'd enjoyed before. Prince Louis continued to play in his playroom, oblivious to the battle that had been fought over it. and perhaps that was how it should be. Children should play freely, without knowing that adults were fighting over locks and boundaries and power. But the adults knew, and they would remember. The lock on Lewis's playroom door remained simple and traditional, a small brass fixture that opened with an ordinary key. But everyone who looked at it understood what it represented: a line that had been crossed, a battle that had been fought, and a boundary that would never be tested again.